Hello, hello. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today for our APIA Narratives to the Front session. We had one of these earlier this year for a talk and play, which is another smaller session that XR for Change does. And what I'm really excited about is this is sort of the fruition of that smaller talk and play now that we have the full stage of Games for Change's actual festival in July. This is going to be a longer, more in-depth conversation with some of the same faces as well as a newer group of people as well. So this specific one is about emerging technology and our points of view around that. I want to start today by saying thank you for coming and also by opening the space with a solidarity statement. So today's whole festival, Games for Change Festival, is being produced from the Lenape and the Canarsie territories in what is commonly known as New York. We as a panel acknowledge and pay our respects to these people of these nations, both past, present, and emerging. I also want to state for myself as a creative maker and as well as an activist that I stand in solidarity to end white supremacy and anti-Blackness and patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia and poverty and ableism and even ageism. And I also stand in solidarity against any racial violence to our community, the Asian Pacific Islanders, as well as against the Black and Indigenous and other communities of color. The work that I personally do is to raise awareness around individual, institutional, and systemic violence against these communities, and I stand in solidarity with their struggle. So thank you so much for joining us again. I want to give us all a quick moment to introduce ourselves as who we are in our day-to-day lives and what we tend to do, whether it's XR related as well as just being human related. A lot of us here are multi-hyphenated. So I want to start first by welcoming David to the space and allowing him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Michaela. That was such a great introduction, first of all, and I echo everything you said. So thank you so much for shepherding that for us and for bringing all of us here together. It's such an opportunity and privilege to be here with such esteemed guests. So my name's David. I'm currently the head of studios at BetterUp, where we create novel transformational experiences. That's a cross-platform, right? Everything from games to things that worked on before in XR. I was very lucky to have been the former creative director for virtual reality at Viacom Next, where I met a lot of these wonderful people here, and we collaborated on a lot of wonderful experiences together. I've also gone on to found my own company called a Lightroom company, where I met and became a fan of Assad's work, and worked with did a lot of work with volumetric holograms as well. So very, very lucky to touch all those things. I'm very, very lucky to be here. And I think what I'll do next is popcorn to Estella, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, David. Thank you, Michaela. Hi, I'm Estella. I am a XR creative director and artist. I'm born in Oakland, born and raised from Oakland. I'm currently on Chinook land, aka Portland. I have been an artist in residence with Tiltbrush, Adobe, Snapchat, among others, as Cartoon Network, etc. I do a lot of creative R&D work, pushing the boundaries of what this technology can do for artists and creatives. And I help companies just work with artists and figure out how to use this immersive technology for the creative realm. I don't know what else to say, so I'm going to pass it to Catherine.
Thanks, Estella. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Yu. I am the executive editor of No Proscenium, which is a newsletter, magazine, and podcast about the immersive arts and entertainment industry, covering everything from immersive theater to live action role-playing, theme parks, brand activations, site-specific performance, XR, and everything in between and all the crossovers. I'm also a student. I'm getting my master's degree in interactive media and game design at USC Games, and also for the summer working on some unannounced super cool stuff at TenderClaws, which you'll probably be hearing about at the end of the year. Okay, I'm gonna pass it to Greg.
Thank you, Catherine. Hey, everyone. Everyone in the audience, thank you for being here. And to Michaela and my honored and esteemed panelists, it's just an honor to be here and be with all of you. So my name is Greg Catano. I am SVP of US Operations for Hologate, We're an immersive media company specializing in location-based entertainment and enterprise. And currently we're in 36 countries, and we just passed our 8 millionth player, so pretty excited about that milestone. And yeah, I've been in entertainment all my life, and I discovered immersive media around 2014 or so, after being in 3D, stereoscopic 3D for a while. So it was a nice transition after that didn't really go where we had hoped it was going to go. But just really excited to be in the immersive space and try to bring, you know, sort of my friends from the traditional media side. I'm also co-vice chair of the Producers Guild, and really working hard to bring the two generations together, I guess, if you will. There's a bit of a chasm between the old school filmmakers and this new school, new media crowd. So I think that both parties can learn a lot from each other, and really hoping to do that. So thank you all for allowing me to be here, and really excited to participate. So, and I guess I'll pass it to my friend Assad. Hey, Assad.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much. It's really lovely. I'm back at Games for Change for the third year this time, so it's starting to feel like there's some clips I can go back to from a couple of years ago. But I'm the CEO of something called Jadu. We've been working a lot with volumetric video, creating holograms for a lot of musicians as a mobile app. Really at the core of all of it has been, the idea of getting mobile AR to more people beyond just filters and things that have reached mainstream adoption. So, in our roadmap is, a lot beyond just volumetric video and music. So that's something that I'm excited about. But in a past life, I was also a director of a bunch of AR experiences, like Terminal 3, that was at Tribeca in 2018, and A Jester's Tale at Sundance in 2019. So through that, I'm know all you guys in one way or the other. And yeah, and I'm from Pakistan, something that has been a very important part of my identity. I don't have an American citizenship or anything, so I'm still a residential alien. So that is an important part. And I recently joined the American Pakistan Foundation. I'm on the board of that now, which I'm excited to, kind of see what else can happen for the diaspora and for me to be connected to my country. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. As I'm sure everyone here who's listening can see, we have an incredible group of people who are also diverse and unique in their own ways. And I just want to say that for myself, I'm a creative strategist and a consultant. I currently work very closely with Crux, which is a cooperative for Black XR creators. That's my aunt's dog, Kiara, in the background. So thank you for sticking with me here. I am very passionate about making sure that people's stories who aren't being told in traditional media is being told using emerging technology in a safe and ethical way, to make sure those communities are not being exploited, but those communities are actually being not only brought on as collaborators and brought on as thought makers in the process of creating stories for themselves, but also so that they can benefit from those stories, whether that's financially, energetically, or awareness raising. And that is done in the with the consent of that community. So I think that's a little bit about me and my background. Working away from our work processes and a little bit back into our history and who we are. I identify as mixed race. I'm half Filipino, and I have a bunch of other things that include some indigenous as well as French Canadian, Portuguese. And I technically struggle with the term Asian Pacific Islander or Asian American, because the Philippines is technically in the Pacific Islands, but it's also technically a part of Asia. So sometimes I identify as a Pacific Islander and people give me blowback and say I'm actually Asian. Sometimes I identify as an Asian American and they give me blowback and say I'm a Pacific Islander American. So it's very interesting, because the history of the Philippines is that it was colonized by the Spanish and then it was colonized by the US. And the only reason that me and my family exist in the US is because my grandfather actually served in the US Navy. There was a pact made after World War II ended, where if Filipinos decided to enlist into the U.S. military services, they would then be sort of grandfathered into a way to be able to get not only a visa, but also citizenship. And that was the way my grandfather was able to get my mom and her sisters and brothers and my grandmother to the US, and then from there bring the rest of his family over. So there's a lot in that I think is very interesting about the way I approach emerging technology, which we'll get into later. But I want to open the floor up to our panelists to talk a little bit about their own history and their own background with the United States. I know, Assad, you touched a little bit about it, so maybe you could go first. And sometimes just realizing that just because we all live under the same terminology doesn't mean we all have the same type of story or even the same type of culture or background. So Assad, I'm going to pass it back to you. And if you want to go a little bit deeper about being Pakistani, and then also a little bit about, you know, coming here when you did and how that unfolded for you, would love to hear a little bit more about that.
For sure. Yeah, so as I said, I'm from Pakistan. I was born in a town called Abbottabad. And, you know, for most of my life growing up, Abbottabad was kind of a quiet hill station town leading to the north. And a lot of people from the south that are going to vacation in the summer would kind of go through Abbottabad. It would take you to all the mountain ranges and everything in the north of Pakistan. Often people kind of have this vision of Pakistan being some dry desert land in Arabia, which none of that is accurate because, you know, some of the world's highest mountain ranges are in Pakistan, the Himalayas, the Karakoram, K2. So I was born in Abbottabad, and this perception of it being a quiet hill station town changed very quickly it changed when I was in my mid-teens, when Osama bin Laden was killed there. And that was very much 5 minutes from my house. My cousins saw the helicopters coming down and everything, and I was watching it on TV, just really shocked that this was taking place so close to where I, you know, have spent all my summers in. And, you know, that's a reality that's kind of carried with me throughout my travels to other parts of the world as well. But so I lived in Pakistan till I was 16. I grew up in a small town called Kira. We moved when we were young. And at 16, I got a scholarship to go study in Europe for high school. And that was just kind of an unexpected thing. You know, doesn't happen to a lot of people from where I'm from. It's a very, you know, if you're a rich kid in a big city going to a private school, maybe you would get a scholarship like that, but it's quite rare for someone from a small town kind of going through government school curriculums to apply and get into something like that. And so it kind of really shifted my life completely. And, you know, I left home when I was 16. And since then, I've actually never lived with my family again in any sustained long periods. It's always been, you know, kind of visiting from time to time. So a big part of my identity is obviously Pakistan, but also my family that happens to be there and the fact that I'm not there. And that, you know, that idea has kind of become even stronger over the last 3 years, because when Trump was elected, I was actually in Pakistan, and the Muslim ban started to happen, and my college insisted that I come back as soon as possible. And that made me cut my trip back home short, but also I've not been back since, because it's kind of tricky. You never know if you're going to be let back in. And because of COVID, just embassies and consulates have been even more stricter. And same with my parents. They applied for a visa to come to Tribeca in 2018, and their passports are still at the embassy. Yeah. So I've been very tangled with kind of just all kinds of nationalistic ideas and the division of countries into nation states, the way it works right now, and immigration and everything that comes with it. It's just a very core part of my identity. So it does come through in my work. Obviously, Terminal 3 is not, if you guys remember, we were tackling a lot of kind of immigration and interrogation and those kind of topics that were very close to me at that time and still are. And I can't just spend my life making work about that. So I had to move on and get on to other things. But that really did set the tone for my career. And it's like a touchstone thing that I can always return to. And, you know, even now, Jadoo is, the word Jadoo is an Urdu word that comes from my language that means magic. And, you know, that's the lore and fables of where I'm coming from is something that is going to show up in our interfaces. You know what I mean? Like we're working on product now. We're not working on story, but it's a very core part that I try to incorporate whenever I can. So I think that's probably enough for an introduction about this. But I just also want to say that as a Pakistani, I'm not often put in the Asian bucket, if you may. Like whenever I get the drop down menu saying what's your nationality or what's what part of the world do you belong to, it's hard to select Asian on it because that's not how people perceive you. But there isn't any other option that better fits either. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I think, as the description said, kind of broadening people's ideas of what it means to be Asian. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. Oftentimes for me too, there's like the other box, and I'm always like, am I the other box? Because I'm not fully, yeah. So I totally understand that feeling of the drop down menu. But moving even previous to what you said and what you talked about being entangled in nationalism, ideology, and bureaucracy, I just want to say thank you for sharing that, and thank you for giving us a taste of how you've been a part of things that might feel very far away for some of us, or historically feel impactful to people that aren't close to us, but you were sitting right here with us on this panel. So thank you. Speaking of immigration, I want to pass the word over to David to give us a little look at his background and a little look at his history as well. So David, why don't you take it for us?
Sure, thanks, Michaela. I mean, Assad, thank you again for sharing all that. I feel like it's really hard to follow what you say because I come from so much more relative privilege, right? Like, so let me paint the picture. I was born in Singapore. I didn't really grow up there, so I have a Singaporean passport. And Singapore is deeply in Asia, but Singapore is one of those countries where it's got a lot of both Eastern and Western influences. So like when you think of Singapore now, you probably think of Crazy Rich Asians, and a lot of the portrayal there isn't, it's exaggerated, but it's not a lie. Like it is a very wealthy nation with a lot of privilege, and now passports is one of the most valuable in the world. And in spite of that, like I just recently immigrated to the United States with my wife and I, and we did that because a lot of the work that I do now, a lot of its base is in the United States, and it oddly enough, like I was born in Singapore, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in a matter of countries, which includes a bit of Singapore, a bit of Taiwan, a bit of Hong Kong, a lot of Australia, a lot of the United States. I've been very, very privileged to sort of been like this Asian guy who grew up in all these Asian and non-Asian countries and sort of like felt the tensions that all came out in between. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's influenced the work, but basically it's oddly enough that the only place where I sort of felt most at home has actually been in New York City, where everyone here is a constituent transient part of that. Like we're a lot of people aren't. I mean, you have a lot of native New Yorkers, but a lot of people who are in New York are from everywhere in the world as well. And that's the closest I've ever felt to a sense of belonging. And a sense of belonging is always something that I wrestle with in my work. I want to touch on a little bit about immigration, since that's the hot topic, right? Like despite having a Singaporean passport aside, like I've been here on visas. Like when the Trump presidency happened, they changed the clause in our visa, and immediately, like I was trapped in Singapore to renew it for a couple of months. And this is when I was still with Viacom. So it's one of those crazy things where like when you are not, so I'm definitely not Asian American. When you're a guest and when you're even a non-immigrant alien resident in the United States, there's so much you can't control. And it's just so funny, like how even with a very privileged passport, like it's again not can't be compared to the fact that your parents' passports are still with the embassy aside. That's crazy, but it's just that like you're at such at the whim of all these powers, and it's really remarkable. So as an immigrant, now that I'm here, I don't know, like I feel like I'll touch on these a little bit more, Michaela, because I feel like it's definitely a can of worms to dig into. But I've always struggled with the fact that I'm Asian, but also the child of many different countries, and I still to this very date don't know how to really deal with that, to the point where I feel completely disingenuous, sort of representing even the Singaporean culture or like bits of Asian culture in any of the work that I do. That I almost run away from it, and maybe that's something I need to talk to my therapist about.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think, again, so often we read things in the media or the news and we're like, in our brains, we're like, well, that doesn't feel very close to home for me, anyone who's watching. But David being stuck in Singapore, Assad's parents' passports being still at the embassy from 2018. Like, these are actual realities that people who live in the United States and do the type of work that seem more privileged or seem like emerging technology would have sort of all of this ability to do whatever and say whatever. There's still a real reality that we're human and that we're at the whim of certain sort of structures and even identities, like David said, and struggling with that. I want to pass the word over to Estella, because I would love to hear a little bit about Estella's own journey and thought processes around being who she is and where her family's from. I've only heard bits and pieces of it, but I think it's a really powerful story. So Estella, why don't you take the floor for us?
Thank you. And thanks for sharing your stories, David and Assad and Michaela as well. Born and raised in Oakland, I identify as Chinese American. I am a citizen of the United States. I am the first generation born in America of my family. My family came from Hong Kong, and prior to that, they escaped communism from mainland China. Before that, I actually have generations of people from my father's side that have come to America at different points in U.S. history. I think one of my great ancestors, great-grandfathers, I think he worked on the Transcontinental Railroad in the West Coast. They couldn't stay for a lot of reasons, a lot of legal reasons, like the Chinese Exclusion Act. So they had to go back to China. So I've had different members of my family come to America, contribute to American society, but then be sent back to China. On my mom's side, my grandfather, instead of staying in China, he actually lived in Cuba, which is really cool. He's Cuban, Chinese Cuban, and I'm pretty sure he had a family there. We all kind of suspect he had a family there, but he would send money back to my mom's family quite often as well. And so for myself and my brothers, there's a certain type of weight that we had growing up, that we're the first generation born here. We got our citizenship right when we were born, obviously, and we're the first generation to go to college as well. So there's a certain amount of duty and responsibility that we have to our family and our heritage. And definitely have a tiger mom. She's still there. That's my tiger mom. So there's a certain amount of in that responsibility, I feel like we had to study hard, make a good living to kind of pay ownership to our parents and our generations before us that worked really hard to get us here. So the first 2 decades of my life was really just okay, doing this stuff for the family and the things I needed to do for, to kind of pay back. And then it wasn't until maybe I was 25, 26, where I was like, okay, I want to go pursue art though. I really just want to study art for myself. And that's just something that I love. And of course, that's very kind of taboo in Chinese American culture is well, how are you going to make money? It's that whole thing of how do you make money? How do you make a living? And so I would say the last 10 years of my life have just been me living out the life that I want, that isn't necessarily following the same path of what a Chinese American is supposed to do. And that's why I do all this XR stuff, pushing the boundaries and breaking rules. I'm really good at that. Other things, I'm part of the demographic of people where they ask me where I'm from. And then they ask me again where I'm from after that. So they'll ask, where am I from? I'll say I'm from Oakland. And they're like, where are you from before that? I was like, I'm from Oakland. It literally happened 2 weeks ago. Somebody asked me where were you before that? And I was like, I was born there. So I grew up kind of in the split between I don't know how to identify as whether I'm fully Chinese or if I'm fully American, or I'm not, I'm culturally American, but I'm also culturally Chinese too. So I'm this blend. So I've come to grips that my generation of people who are first generation born here, we kind of live in this split and this tension between these two identities. And it's something that's unique to our the first generation born here, where we have these influences of our parents' culture as well as the culture that we are here. And I've accepted that I will never really feel like I fit in either, and that's okay.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, because my family was also like, "You're gonna go dance," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go dance and figure it out," and they were like, "Good luck." And I was like, "Well, I'll figure it out." And they're like, "Oh, so dancing means you like make money?" And I'm like, sure, whatever. Like, ended up dropping out of college and working on Disney Cruise Line, and they flipped out on me. And I have both American and Filipino in my family, and they both were like, "What in the heck is she doing?" And I was like, living my best life as to who I want to be. So I agree with you, Estella. There's that weird in between. Speaking of the weird in between, Greg, you and I talked a little bit about your background and a little bit about how your family's history of being rooted here in the U.S. has shifted your sort of perspective. I would love for you to share that a little bit with the audience.
Right. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for sharing your stories. I had no idea of your backgrounds, and it furthers my respect for all of you and everything that you've accomplished. So thank you again for having me on this panel. And I wanted to tell everyone on the panel and everyone watching today is that this is actually one of the first times that I've been asked to speak about my background. And it's not really something that I think about on a daily basis. And I'll tell you why. So I'm fourth generation American, and Japanese American or Japanese descent. But 4 generations of being in America, and but the one thing that most, if anyone, would know about me is that both my parents and both sides of my grandparents were in the internment camps. And so think of the violation of civil rights when you think about, here I am, fourth generation, my parents and my grandparents, third and second respectively, and all their possessions were taken. They were forced to move and put into these camps. And my dad was put in the infamous Manzanar, which was just horrible conditions. And again, until we spoke about it, Michaela, or if people ask me, here and there throughout my life, it then gives me pause, because I then think about what influence it has made on my life, what impact it has made on my life. And let me first speak about the like my cousins or my grandfather. My grandfather on my mom's side was an attorney before here in Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles right now, and he was an attorney, very successful practice. And then imagine being told that he would have to just walk away from his practice, sell everything that he has, and then be put into a camp for many years. Well, I just found out that through my mom, that when they had returned after the war was over, that all of their obviously all their possessions were taken, their home, but the one thing that was really challenging for me to hear from my mother, maybe 5 years ago, she told me that when they got back, he tried to start up his practice again, and all of his legal books were just completely gone, and all his files, everything, so he basically had to start from scratch. But not only that, is that nobody in LA would work with him because he was of Japanese descent. And so they struggled. My mom said they were just incredibly poor, trying to make it, or trying to start all over again here in Los Angeles. And the only work that he would be getting was from Japanese neighbors, and they didn't have any money, so they would pay him vegetables, or whatever they had that they can offer in trade. And that was just a really, really challenging thing to hear for me, because we didn't really talk about it as I was growing up. It was something that was super painful, as you can imagine. But I think rather than just curling up in a ball, like for example, my cousins, I'll say about my grandfather, he became a prestigious judge in Los Angeles, fighting for civil rights and fighting for the underdog. And my cousins became attorneys. My one cousin, Paul, ended up being acting chair for the EEOC, equal employment. So I feel that it did make an impact on our lives. And in my case, I mean, I didn't become an attorney, wasn't smart enough, wasn't very good in school, but I was an artist. I was a creative, person, and I think the way that my parents had shown me to, maybe indirectly shown me, they would just support me in any way that they could. Never putting up these boundaries for me is really allowing me to be an artist, allowing me to be a creative. And I remember coming back from a wedding. I was in the back seat. My parents were driving us back, and I remember making a comment like, "I could have done better," and they're saying, "What are you talking about?" And I was referring to the DJ that was playing. Oh, I think I was maybe 14 or so, and I said, "Oh, I felt that I can do better as a DJ." And instead of saying how crazy that was, or that's such a silly thing to say, they turned to me and they said, "How would you do it?" And I remember that to this day, and I feel that encouragement, again, I don't know if that was because of what they went through, but they have always allowed me to express myself, to support anyone that I could, and that has really transcended into my career, my life, is where I think everything that I do, I've been in entertainment all my life, but everything that I do is about how can I spend and dedicate a big portion of my life to help others. And so I'm on a couple advisory boards in education, for the Cal State University System Entertainment Alliance. I'm an advisor on the Boys and Girls Club, Alliance here in Los Angeles. And, looking at, again, how can I encourage other creatives, and even in the XR industry, and maybe I know this is a question probably for later, but looking at how can I use my experience to guide others new to entertainment, new to media, new business, and even advising my friends not to sign a long-term lease on a space until we would see some revenue coming through XR, and or just again encouraging artists to, hey, keep at it, and if you have any questions, I know you don't know me very well, but if you have any questions or if you need some context, give me a call and I'll see what I can do. So again, I think that that difficult history in our family has transcended into my life. Again, even though that I don't put it, front and center when I'm out with the community or I'm on panels, it's there, and I know that it is part of my fiber, and so yeah, thank you for letting me share something that I really haven't been able to talk about, and again, not that I'm ashamed of my background. I'm proud to be of Japanese descent, but I'm also proud to. Oh, and I'm also proud of heritage, what my family has gone through, and again, I may not be an attorney, but anything that I can do in my capacity, I will hopefully do in my lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Just want to let you know, I think your camera turned off, so I'm not sure if you can see us, but we can't see you, but we can still hear.
Yeah, I can see you guys, but I'll see if I can maneuver around the house.
Yeah. No worries. I just want to say thank you to Greg for sharing. And I know, again, to anyone who's listening, this might feel very indulgent that we're going through these stories of ourselves and who we are and our families and backgrounds. But I think what's really important to realize is that a lot of us are seen as sort of these like made in sort of the same sort of box or bubble of like being a successful person in XR or being a well-known person in emerging technology. And I think what's important to realize is that we all have a really unique story that actually influences how we approach our work and how we approach technology and the type of work we're doing, whether that's at the level that Greg's doing it for the community of being an advisor for artists, or at the level that Estella's doing it as being an artist, or Assad's doing it at being a company owner, or David's doing it at leading a company, or how Catherine's doing it where she's still studying school, but she's also influencing people with her voice through No Proscenium. So I'm really excited to sort of wrap up this question with Catherine, because Catherine and I work together at No Pro, but I don't actually know that much of Catherine's story. So this will be a first time for me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I guess thank you, Michaela, David, Greg, Estella, Assad. Just really, really powerful to like hear your stories. And I just want you to know, like, I see you, right? Like I see you. It's so powerful to see and be seen. I think out of all of us, I probably come from the most quote unquote like classical or traditional story, because my parents came here as college students when everything opened up in the late 60s, early 70s. They lived in the Midwest. My dad has a joke that he threw a dart and a map, and that's how he ended up in Nebraska. He had no idea what was in store for him. And he, like, my parents, I think, really bought into that idea of an American dream. So he worked the cafeteria and he worked the mainframe computer. If you ticked him off, he would accidentally drop your cards, for example. This is back when computers needed like those giant punch cards. And he would sell space in his driveway and lawn for people to park during football games. So they were just scraping together like as much money as possible and just trying to be like, I need to succeed because my family's counting on me. There's a story that I was told when I was born. My grandfather apologized to my mother because he had no inheritance to give. And they decided that the inheritance would be a good education in the United States. So a lot of my childhood is around feeling like we're gonna make it, we gotta work really hard, things are not gonna be fair, but we're gonna try our best. And remember, this is the 80s and 90s, so you've got all that stuff around tons of East Asian immigration, you've got all that stuff around the model minority, people being really competitive purely on like academics. So, Chinese American parents talking about colleges and going on college tours and trying to see if like their kid would get into the better school or whose kid wasn't doing as well, and was a lot of emphasis on testing and grades. And when I had artistic tendencies, it's not like my parents said no. They're like, oh, you can have the art lessons, you can have the music lessons, we'll figure out how to pay for it. But do you think you could be like an engineer in the day and like just go be like an artist at night? Because that's also what they did, is like they might work full time and then go to like community college or something at night. My mom actually became a CPA while I was a kid, taking classes at night. So to them, working all the time was super normal. Being dedicated was just very normalized. And so when I went to college, I had to study technology and engineering. So I felt lucky that that was a field that was technical enough to have stability, but also provided some amount of creativity. I have no idea if they really understand what it means to make games or games in VR, but it's still like close enough to tech that they kind of get that, there's lots of opportunities there, but at the same time, there's that creative freedom, there's that ability to express yourself. So there's a lot of that model minority American dream stuff in my background. And then my parents were some of the first ones from their families to come here. I have cousins who started immigrating when they were 9 or 12 or even teenagers, or even coming here specifically to go to college, just because they felt that the opportunities were better here. And because my family was already here, it was like, oh yeah, hey cousin, sleep in our spare bedroom. We'll try to get you a car. We'll see if we can like transfer you from the community college to the local UC. So it was a lot about like all of us trying to get together and help each other, because that American dream was like, just out of reach. And so I think that influences a lot of what I choose to do, what I choose to take on. And again, I'm really lucky that something like XR lets me flex those artistic muscles, but also has that technology or engineering background that my parents really value.
Thank you, Catherine. So I know we're running a little short on time, and I think time is abundant and energy is abundant, and this is more than what we came here for already. I want to sort of combine a couple of the questions I had, which we're talking about like your past experiences and memories and your current work and whatever emerging technology you would like to highlight that you work with, and how you think your approach to that emerging technology has been sort of shaped. And I know Assad got into it a little. I know David hinted at it. So I know we're all chomping at the bit to talk about how we feel we approach our work. I will briefly share mine. Being someone from two very different cultures, like grew up with a Midwest white family in the middle of Ohio, grew up with a Milpitas Filipino family that was ginormous and loud and ate food all the time. I think that I start to see how things blend and how things are put together in ways that maybe people don't think of at first. And for me, that was journalism and nonfiction storytelling with immersive interactive mediums like VR, like AI, like AR, and even with theater. And so I was kind of this crazy person for a little while running around Los Angeles being like, you got to try VR and you got to do it for journalism. And I'd like talk to the LA Times, AAJA people and be like, why aren't you filming anything in 360? Like, why aren't you immersing people into the stories? Why aren't you making them interact? And they all looked at me like I was crazy, and they all sort of like laughed at me behind my back, which was totally fine because I was this like enthusiastic 18-year-old, which is where ageism sort of comes in for me and a lot of the work that I do, because I come up against that a lot. And I feel that someone took a chance on me and saw the vision that I had because they were also forward thinking and seeing the way those things would blend together. And I have to say that I think that I continue to bring that in my day-to-day work with the interactive, immersive sort of technologies I like to play with while I'm telling stories about real people and real humans. So that's a little bit about how I approach my work. And I think that's formed from a very specific point of view about being a person of mixed race. I want to hand it back to Catherine since she wrapped us up on the last question. Catherine, tell us a little bit about how that influences your emerging technology work.
Yeah, so as someone who is back in graduate school, the oldest person in her cohort, and surrounded by a lot of 20-year-olds all day, I think a lot about de-siloing, and I think a lot about leaving doors open. So I have worked in kind of the technology startup world, but I've also covered immersive art and entertainment, but I'm also making video games. And I know that one of the things that really excites me about XR is the diversity of perspectives that it can really benefit from. Whether or not it's like, hey, choreographer, dance person, did you know that you could actually have an influence on this like VR piece? Or like, hey, person who builds physical sets for haunted houses, I think you might be a really good world builder in VR chat. So making sure that people with all sorts of different talents are included in the process. And then if I'm lucky enough to be part of something, like I want to hire my friends, I want to uplift underrepresented voices, and I want to leave that door open so I'm not the only one that gets to go in.
And speaking as someone who has been influenced by Catherine's work in community with No Proscenium, that is definitely the point of view that I think even the community of No Pro takes on. When Catherine was describing her family and the extra bed and figuring out the car, that's sort of how I feel we're building No Proscenium from the ground up as like volunteer staff trying to just raise awareness about all these cool, immersive, interactive, niche things happening. So yes, thank you, Catherine. I want to pass it to Assad. Assad, tell us, I know you kind of got into how the interface of Jadoo works with your background, but if there's anything more in depth you want to tell us, whether that's in theory or creativity or in architecture, I'd love to have you share that.
Sure. Yeah, I think your relationship is changing all the time. I feel like the way I was influenced by my background 3 or 4 years ago is different now. And so when I left Pakistan for the first time and I went to Europe, at that point, obviously there was some sense of patriotism and representing your country. I was in an international school, so everyone else was representing their countries and people had just left, wherever they were from to be there together. And so your national dresses and music and all those things, you want to be sharing them to a certain extent. But at the same time, you're kind of happy that you're away. Like it's very new, right? Like I've just left home. And I'm happy to be out in the world on my own, and also happy to let go of a lot of things that I felt were holding me back for where I was coming from. So a lot of those first few years were kind of that idea. And then coming to the US, I always had kind of a Silicon Valley dream. I grew up making websites when I was 11, reading Paul Graham essays, and that's kind of what I wanted. But I ended up going to art school in the US, and that whole idea was challenged a bit where, I was going to school with a generation that was pretty much done with Silicon Valley and hated all big tech and everything. And so my relationship was challenged at kind of a pivotal time in my life where I had to look at it in a more nuanced way myself. And at that time, I feel like my relationship to Pakistan was more like reactionary almost to circumstances. Like Terminal 3 was very much coming out of me actually having a bunch of really bad experiences with customs officers and me getting angry in situations. Maybe I could have played it a bit more relaxed. And, the FBI ended up coming to my school in Vermont, which was, something that was informing that as well. So it was really reactionary. Since then, since I'm not actively tackling those topics, I think it's become a bit more nuanced in a way that I like, and I want to, I'm at the stage in my life, I'm 25, I've been away from home for long enough that I'm kind of rediscovering some of Pakistan's culture in a way that's really lovely. Like I've grown up with these things, but I can appreciate them more in a certain way. I think there's just so much rich like culture and history in that part of the world, from all the Mughal emperors and all the architecture and art that popped up around 300 years ago before the British invaded, that kind of didn't really get didn't get to develop for too long. There was good stuff there, it just didn't get to develop for too long. And I want that to come through in my work. So, one of the things that we are trying to do with Jadu going forward is that, first of all, we're announcing something today, straight after this panel, that it's just taking a few steps beyond volumetrics, as I was kind of alluding to earlier. We have started engaging a lot more with the crypto world, and that's something that we see a lot of opportunity in. And essentially, the idea is that a lot more type of content would exist on our app, and there would be tools for manipulating it, using it, and just allowing for interactions beyond three-dimensional performances. And so because of that, the possibilities are really opening up as creators for us to be able to express things. And one of the big things that we're kind of really emphasizing is not wanting to do interfaces the way interfaces have become, like where the Silicon Valley idea of like every app looks the same and all the buttons are perfectly optimized, and you're all like 100 people in San Francisco are sitting optimizing this one button. We want to move beyond that idea and make it more fun and delightful again, and really rely on 3D objects as interface a bit more. So we're starting to build some story worlds and some objects that have some lore and history that allow you to do functions in the app like you otherwise would press a button to do, but now you engage with these like characters and lore in order to perform those functions. Like we're going to have drawing in the app, but it's not going to be a drawing button. It's going to be a drawing charm that's attached to this, like astrolabe that's floating in your room. And so we're building a lot of that kind of stuff. And since we're getting into that, I think inheriting and taking ideas from different parts of the world, and for me to bring ideas out of my culture. And there's so much fairy tale and lore up in the north. There's so many stories of fairies that would kidnap tourists under a mountain and whatnot. And I want to inherit from that and kind of bring that stuff in as we develop the Jadu world's lore. Yeah.
Ooh, I hear transmedia in that. Like I hear a little bit of like an MCU sort of multi-universe, multi-dimensional experience you're building, Assad, and I can't wait to continue to follow and check it out and see, especially again coming from a completely different perspective and point of view that isn't so potentially what we would kind of see as westernized or like templatized. So thank you, and thank you for that work. I just want to say that this session is going to go over a few minutes. We did get permission from our moderator that we could go over a few minutes, so nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So my panelists, does anyone have a hard out right at 11:20 or at the 20-minute mark? I know we're all in different time zones. All good? Okay, great. Just want to be aware of that. Cool. Coming back into the panel, Estella, do you want to share a little bit about how your approach to emerging technology and artists sort of move into that space with your background and point of view?
I would love to. Thanks, Michaela. I was just thinking a bit like, how does that play out for me? I think this is where intersectionality comes into play for me a lot, actually, as a woman of color in this space, a Chinese woman of color. The way I was raised is that I shouldn't have a voice. I should stay quiet, and I should be submissive, and I shouldn't take up space. That came from both of my cultures, being a Chinese person and as an American person. So it's like, as a woman, I'm supposed to just be subdued. So I found that in a lot of times when I do events like this, when I talk on stage, when I share my work and I share my authentic story, it's when it's the most impactful. It's when it inspires people the most. Two of the greatest compliments that I got was, I was at a conference, I shared my work and my artistic visions, and I've had people come up to me and say, like, I want you to be my daughter's role model. And I'm like, oh my God, that's like, it just hits my heart, because it's like, I'm a woman in tech and I'm also a woman artist as well. Like, those things, those intersectionalities are hard to find. And so it really means a lot to me when someone says something like that. Another one is, I gave a talk in China before, and it was interesting because in China, the way they do things is a little differently than they do at festivals here. Sometimes they'll hire people to like glam up the festivals. So they're kind of like volunteers or hired people that are like, they look very beautiful and they're there to like present and open the ceremony of the festival. So I was giving a talk there, sharing my work, and the young girls that attended as like the hired kind of beauty came up to me afterwards, and they're like, we've never seen a woman artist on stage like you before. And it just inspired them to like I can create art, like I can go and make art and do this. And it's just like, it hit home for me, because like, yeah, it's true too for me. Like, I haven't really seen anyone like myself. I've never seen anyone before me on stage. And so when I can just share my story and share my art like authentically as myself, when I tell stories that are my stories and be in a situation like this is where I know I make the most impact. So when I make art, when I choose the projects that I work on and collaborations, I want to make sure it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that really hits home for me and resonates with my values and my ethics. If it doesn't, usually I pass on it. It has to be something that only I can do, that like really amplifies a story that I can tell, that can help inspire other people to become creators, to come into this space. That's something I work hard on, is like, how do I make this technology accessible so that people who are intimidated won't be intimidated to come into this space? How do I provide tutorials? How do I show people, like, this is how you make an AR filter. You just use a Snapchat thing, or you just use a Spark AR thing, and giving back to communities that are underprivileged. That includes Black, BIPOC, Indigenous, women groups. So I'm all about helping people who have less access or who would otherwise feel intimidated by a very privileged technology. So that's really important for me.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I think I identify, just a quick note on that, I identify as queer. So a lot of like, also sort of the pushback I always get is that people will always say like, oh, I never think you as you until you tell me more about you. And I'm like, that approach of like putting me in a bubble or putting me in like a square peg before you even get to know me is so apparent. Like, I think a lot for like women and even men who appear APIA or seen as APIA. And David, I know you sort of spoke about that, so I'd love to pass the word over to you to answer the question next.
Yeah, it's so. Let me start with this. Like, I always thought of emerging tech as being at its best an immigrant technology. Okay, so virtual reality at its best is an immigrant medium. What I mean by that is, like any other recipients of a large, diverse of people and disciplines, it thrives. At its best is that. In the early days, VR was like that. In the early days, it was one of the most diverse and inclusive mediums because you had everyone from game design, not just game design and filmmakers, you had artists, you had architects, you had interior designers, you had everyone contributing to it. But unfortunately, like every sort of recipient of rapid migration, you sort of have these institutions building up. I think there's studies done that if you take this analogy a little bit further, like some of the most wealthiest countries in the world have, especially in the 20th century, have benefited, those who have benefited from a lot of migration have thrived. And you can sort of see that right now with sort of influx of migration to China. Like a lot of the success they're having is because a lot of people in Asia are actually migrating there. So I mean, if you wear the lens of like emerging tech that way, like that was how I viewed VR in the early days, and that's why I participated in it. Like it was the most colorful medium at the point in time, and I have a suspicion that's why it attracted a lot of us as well. And that's why to this very day, like not just VR, but also the independent game space, the place which hasn't yet been colonized, arguably, that it remains one of the most colorful, well-represented mediums. Again, not perfect. In fact, now VR is not that for a variety of reasons. So when I wear the lens of like how this has informed my work, I think I know we're short on time, but what I want to end off is like I want to continue championing getting more seats to the table in every medium I work on. One of the metrics we have for hiring right now at BetterUp is like we want at least 75% of inbound applicants to come from underrepresented backgrounds. I'm so far from that metric, and I'm still trying to figure out how to solve that. And if you have any ideas, please reach out to me. I want to do that. But I want to give time to the rest of my panelists as well. I know we're short on time. So Michaela, but thank you so much for asking this question.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about your point of view about why you got into VR earlier, but I don't think you've ever specified how it's like how it used to be to you, the immigrant medium. And I absolutely love that sort of like idea of at one point in time, VR was sort of the melting pot. So thank you for sharing that. I want to sort of hand it over to Greg. Greg, please give us your insight. I mean, you are probably one of the only people I've ever heard give us an actual number about XR users, over 8 million players with HoloGate and whatnot. So I think any other more insight you can give to us about your thoughts around XR and HoloGate and distribution and how you approach that from your unique point of view, I think will be super valuable to the rest of us sitting here. At least for me, I'm excited to hear it.
Absolutely. And hopefully you can see me, or hopefully I'm on camera again.
Yes, you're back.
Yes.
It's not you. I'm overexposed on social media, so you can see my face there plenty of times. So I guess I'd go back and think about what really motivated me about virtual reality or XR, and how I chose my path, starting with Google Cardboard, the events that I do with Chris Crisatelli with VR Festival, Dreamland, and with HoloGate. And I think after I was just wowed by the magic of VR, getting an early Oculus demo, immediately my mind went into overgear, it was overcranked, I guess. And I was back in my office thinking about all of the potential and thinking about the important messages that incredible content creators like yourselves and people watching from home, people that I've met in the community that had a message to share, and in addition, thinking about all of the enterprise applications, medical and training and education. Education being very close to my heart because of what a struggle it was for me, and realizing how I think I would have been a better student if I was able to be put into the content, and what the lesson plan was. And so it hit me when I was sitting in my office, working like 15 hours a day, just trying to figure out what was my place, where did I see my impact in XR, and it was distribution. So to sort of lead back into what you're asking, Michaela, Hologate is a distribution platform. I'm not even a gamer, and yet when I met Life of Hologate and he was describing what Hologate was going to be, that was in my head. That vision of that turnkey multiplayer system in public spaces was in my head. And prior to that, it hit me that cardboard was magical enough to me. It was the first time in 100 years that now we're inside content, and rather than just watching it on a two-dimensional screen. And with the events that Chris and I do with Dreamland and VR Fest, it was another outlet for content creators like yourselves, other content creators, to get an opportunity to promote their work at events like CES and Coachella and Sundance and South by Southwest. We'd have these little pop-ups, and any content creators that wanted to demo their work and practice their pitch, that's what we were there for. And never made a profit, but that's not what it was about. And we've always would brainstorm about with our events, well, what can we do to further inclusion? And so we had, with Joe Devon and Diamond, we had an accessibility panel in CES of earlier this year. We had Crux, which doing incredible stuff, and a Pride event recently. So anything that we can do to use our access to help the community or help the message get out there, we were all for that. And so if you look at my journey, Cardboard, Dreamland, or VR Fest, and with Hologate, it was all public access. It was all ways that we can get important messages and games, because I saw that as low-hanging fruit too, to get people more excited about virtual reality. Maybe they may not be drawn to the heavier stuff right away, and if games does it and gets them excited, maybe they'll go further down that rabbit hole just through discovery. It may not be the sexiest aspect of virtual reality, but I remember being on an early panel, and it was like Helen C2, and it was the guys from Riot, and they're all talking about these important messages that they wanted to get out. And I was last in this final question about what do you think is going to be the turning point, and I said I want to build the railroad. I want to build the railroad for everyone so that we can get all the goods to the people. We can get these important messages out to everyone. So it's helped. I guess my earlier background, may not be directly related to what my family went through, but I think again it goes back to how can I help our community? How can I help society? And whether it be through education, access, is we have to make that pragmatic call of that connection point with the consumer, that connection point to get eyeballs on these messages to then make an impact and hopefully make a living off of it.
Thank you, Greg. I just want to wrap by saying what feels to me as the theme or the storyline through this panel would be, a history of gatekeeping leads to you becoming the gatekeeper that opens the floodgates. A history of being someone who doesn't feel fully formed in their own space with their family becomes someone who's fully formed to inspire others to take up space in their own ways outside of their family. Someone who sees the opportunity of seeing family helping people become people who give opportunities and give the doors. Someone who feels they don't fully belong to one culture or another culture, or grows up in many different backgrounds, becomes a person that sees technology that potentially has that potential to bring people from all different backgrounds in together. And someone who potentially feels that they are in the midst of international struggle brings magic and light and joy to people wherever they are and whoever they're coming from, even if the technology feels really sort of forward thinking or in a world where people wouldn't understand it. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for bringing your love, your magic, your light, your understanding to this world of XR that we exist in. Please take a moment, and if you would like to put your contact information or your LinkedIn page in the chat, I want to take time for all of my panelists to be able to do that so that anyone who's still listening in can find you all or reach out to you all. We are not a monolith. And we are all unique, and we are all so, so, so important to every little part of any industry, whether it's the gaming industry or the XR industry. So thank you again for your time. Thank you again for valuing us and valuing our stories. And we will definitely continue to see everyone around this kind of circuit of XR, emerging tech, and like cool, creative people that I absolutely love hanging out with. So just want to wrap up by saying thank you to you all. Have a
Thanks, Michaela.
This was
Thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
And thanks for everyone at home.